Hello, my name's Ian. Today I'm going to be talking you through setting up users for Sicon Barcoding and Warehousing. This is all done in the Sage 200 application, so you're going to need Sicon Barcoding and Warehousing utilities settings, and it's the second tab here that we're actually interested in, users and permissions. First thing to give some consideration to is the number of licenses that you've actually got. So you can see here I've got a 5 user license. Now that doesn't mean to say that I can't have more than 5 users created in here. I can have as many as you want really, but what it does mean is that you can only ever have 5 enabled at any one time. So if you want to move people around for sicknesses or holidays, what you would have to do is untick one user and then tick the second user. The next thing to think about is the naming conventions for your users. So you can see here I've got a couple of examples. Ian is obviously referencing an individual, whereas the second one, goods in, is actually representing more of a role than an individual. So the thing you have to bear in mind with that one is if you actually have a look at your stock item history, for example, you can see here this is a goods received, and what Sicon have actually done, if you tick the show details option, is they've added an extra field and it actually tells you which handheld user made the transaction. So with the goods in example, you wouldn't know who had actually got the scanner in the hand at any one time. So in addition to the username, you'll also need to give some consideration to passwords. The password is 6 characters. Other than that, there is no enforcement. It is case sensitive, but it's not forcing you to put special characters in. The thing you have to bear in mind is that when users are entering the password, they're using in effect almost a telephone style keypad, so you don't want them having to sort of like go wandering around looking for special characters, etc. Now if a user does forget their password or you need to reset it for any reason, you can do that quite simply by highlighting the user and then going down to the bottom, clicking reset password, and you can type in the new password. It doesn't actually tell you what it is or show what it is, but as with most things password related, you have to confirm it twice. So the first thing we'll do is we will give the user a meaningful name, and then we can then look at the individual permissions. What you have to bear in mind is that you will see here the full options that Sicon Barcoding and Warehousing has, even though you may not have the module. So for example, if you've not got works order processing, then we can simply untick it. Now if this user was just in the sort of the goods in area, then we can take off things like sales order processing and then just focus on the sort of like the modules that affect that particular user's role. What you've got to bear in mind is that the handheld screens can be quite small, so you don't want people having to scroll up and down to find the option that they're actually looking for. We want to make it as simple as possible, as well as considering the security elements. So having configured the roles, what we can then do is we can move on to the options tab. Some of these are not too intuitive, so I will just cover the less obvious ones for you now. Minimum quantity to allow typing. By default that's set to 0. So what that means is that a user can scan an item once and then they can type in the quantity that is required. If I was to set that for 3, for example, it means that if a user wanted to pick 2 items, they would have to scan it twice. But as soon as they hit that threshold of 3, they can scan it once and then just type in the quantity that is required. The next one that is not so obvious is this one here, allow stock inquiry bin change. Bin priorities actually are the control the way barcoding and warehousing makes its allocations. So the chances are that you don't want warehouse operatives to change those rules or change the bin priorities. So what you can actually do is untick that, so that would be controlled more at a sort of a senior level. One underneath it, allowing add sales order items lines. What that means is if somebody's actually picking a sales order, if there is an item that has not been entered on the sales order when it was created, they could actually add it to the actual sales order. Again, that may not be something that you want. When you set the system up, you actually define all your bin numbers, so they are sort of really from a predefined list. And again, it may well be that we don't want people to create bin numbers willy-nilly, because it does mean that you could end up with some, not duplications, but something of a sort of like a very similar bin name. Bin names, by the way, are not case sensitive, so again, that is probably something that we will untick. By default, whenever the barcoding and warehousing shows you a list of items to action, then they are sorted in bin priority, so you don't have to sort of keep walking around the warehouse in loops. It will give you the most efficient way of navigating the warehouse. If we were to tick that, then it would be shown in the order in which they were actually entered on the sales order. The next tab along is the warehouse tab, so relatively straightforward. If you do have multiple warehouses, then you can give the user access to whichever warehouses you want. So for example, I'm adding the overflow warehouse there. You can see here that my home warehouse is marked as the default. You can only have one marked as the default, so what that means is when the user logs into the scanner, they will be taken straight into the home warehouse. If you don't have that ticked, then when they log into the scanner, they'll be presented with a list of warehouses and they can choose which one they want to log into. And so that brings us on to our final tab in setting up a users, which is the printers tab. So in here, what you can actually define is the printers that this user has access to. So if you've got people that are working on packing benches or on a production machine and they've got a printer next to them, then you can define that printer there for things like labels, packing lists, dispatch notes, invoices, and courier labels, for example. So there is a bit of a hierarchy going on. So if we've got something defined here, this is the first place that it's actually going to look for a printer. If there is nothing set there, what it then does is it refers back to two tabs here, labels and reports. So we can see here that we've got the labels tab. So nothing set against a user, it will then look at label level and pick up a printer from there, and again, if there is actually nothing set there, it will actually refer back to whatever you have set at the top here, and that applies to the reports tab as well, so the same principle. So that's how you set your users up. Hopefully you found that useful, but as always, any problems, please contact your consultant or the support team. Thanks for joining us.